What were some of the old? What are some of the old shows that you've come across while working at Henry Ford there? What are some of the other shows? Because I know the Guiding Light started out as a radio show. What are some of the other radio shows of the day that you can
The
recall?
Guiding Light was, of course, a soap opera, daytime soap opera. I try to run the gamut of comedies. George Burns and Gracie Allen is another one that was very, very popular. And there were situation comedies like The Aldrich Family with Ezra Stone, for the most part, playing the title role. And he had to leave. I think some of the actors had to leave to become involved in the military, so they got other lesser known actors. That was the case on a number of different shows. Our Miss Brooks, starring Eve Arden, was a long running show, another show that made transition to television. And then there were the Westerns, couple different types of
Yeah,
Westerns.
didn't Gunsmoke start on the radio, if I'm not mistaken?
Gunsmoke did, and Gunsmoke actually came along toward the end of radio. I believe in 1949, they did a audition. They tried out a couple different actors, and they didn't want to have William Conrad because it seemed like William Conrad's voice was everywhere. He was on shows like Escape, which was which was a show kind of like Suspense. But
Right.
In the end, it's like, well, William Conrad is the best for this role, and he held that role from the early 50s right through the end of the radio series, but they didn't want to use him on television because, of course, he became canon and the central figure on Jake and the Fat Man on television. But those are kind of the some of the adult westerns. Have Gun Will Travel was on both radio and television. Started on radio and had a good run on radio. It's played by John Daner. Those were some of but there were also kids westerns, and the most obvious one produced right here in Detroit was The Lone Ranger. That was primarily a kid show, but they tried to teach good things with the kind of the plot of the masked man always does good deeds.
Yeah.
He never shoots to kill, that kind of stuff. He has his faithful companion is an Indian by the name of Tano. Primarily a kid show, but then they did other shows like Sergeant Preston of the Yukon and the Green Hornet.
Yeah, the Green Hornet. That was a big radio program out of Detroit, right?
Out of Detroit, right out of WXYZ. And George W. Trendle was responsible for all of that. And
You know what I find fascinating about that? Let me interject something real quick, Bob. What I find is when they were doing those shows, they would do them for Detroit and the East Coast. They would do the show, whether it be the Green Hornet or the Lone Rangers or some of the others that were coming out of Detroit, and then they would go to dinner, and then come back and do it again for the West Coast. So it would be a different show, and that's how they did radio.
Yeah. It wasn't necessarily just playing back a recording, because that was a lot more expensive to make a recording back than what it is today. Because they were using 16-inch transcription records, which is kind of how we can still hear all those shows today. Is there's people specializing in that, but I digress.
So we're gonna do it live. We're gonna do it live.
Yeah. Do it live. Let's just do it again. And that part where you messed up on that, or sound effects were missed, we're going to try to do it better for the West Coast.